My daughter-in-law said she didn't want this useless old woman in her house anymore. Those words, child, I will never forget. They cut through me sharper than any knife. I wasn't standing in the room when she said it. I was just beyond the kitchen door, holding a basket of folded laundry, my hands trembling as her voice traveled through the air like poison. Your father, my son, sat at the table with her. He didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He just stayed quiet, sipping his coffee, while she pushed my plate aside and said she was tired of feeding a woman who gave nothing back. I pressed my back against the wall that night, and I felt my legs nearly give way. For years, I had scrubbed her floors, cooked her meals, and rocked you children to sleep when she wanted her rest. And yet, I had become invisible, the ghost walking her hallways. I didn't cry, though my throat burned. I just whispered to myself, be still. Be still. The very next morning, as the sun spilled weak light across the windows, there came a knock at the door. It startled everyone. Clara, that's your mother, thought it might be the mailman. But when she opened the door, there stood Mr. Harris, the lawyer. He held a one brown envelope in his hand. His face was calm, but his eyes told me he knew everything. Is Mrs. Whitman home? He asked, his voice steady. I stepped forward, wiping my hands on my apron, and for the first time in years, I felt taller than the walls that had closed me in. Clara's mouth twisted into a frown, and Michael, your father, shifted in his chair, uneasy. Mr. Harris placed the envelope gently on the table. Child, you see, that was the moment the balance began to change. All the nights I had hidden my sacrifices, all the years I had let silence cover my pain, they were about to be revealed. But before you understand what was inside that envelope, you must understand the life that led me to this moment. I was not always an old woman with trembling hands and aching bones. Once, I was a girl full of fire. I grew up in a small town, where the winters were bitter and the summers too hot. My mother scrubbed houses for a living, and my father died young, leaving me to help raise my younger brothers. I learned early that survival meant sacrifice. I would wake before dawn, walk miles to school with holes in my shoes, then rush home to fetch water, chop wood, and cook supper for the boys. When I was 17, I met your grandfather, James Whitman. He had a smile that made my heart stutter. He was strong, with hands that smelled of pine and leather. But what drew me most was not his strength, it was his kindness. We married young. Life wasn't easy. We had no money, only dreams and determination. I worked nights in the diner, scrubbing floors until my knees ached. He took odd jobs, sometimes 2 or 3 at once, hauling lumber, fixing roofs, even selling vegetables from our small garden. We were poor, but we laughed often. Then you know what came, child. The war. James was drafted, and I was left behind with your father, just a baby in my arms. I remember standing at the train station, clutching his coat, praying he would come back. The whistle blew, the train pulled away, and the world felt suddenly hollow. I was 21 years old when the telegram arrived. A folded piece of paper that said, "We regret to inform you," and my world collapsed. I sank to the floor, your father crying beside me, and I remember thinking, how can the sun still rise when he will never again? But the sun did rise. And underscore 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 underscore. Life became survival. I sewed clothes for neighbors, baked bread, and took laundry into my small hands until my knuckles split. Every coin I saved, I hid away, knowing that someday I would build something lasting for my child. Something that could not be taken away. That, child, is how this house came to be. Not by gift, not by chance, but by sacrifice. Brick by brick, board by board, it rose from the sweat of my brow and the ache of my bones. And yet, years later, my own daughter-in-law would dare to call me useless. That evening, after Mr. Harris left the envelope on the table, I went to my small room in the back of the house. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hand resting on the one photograph of James, your grandfather. His eyes, kind even in black and white, seemed to tell me, hold steady. The time has come. And so, I waited. The truth, child, always has its moment. But before I tell you how it all unfolded, you must know what I gave, what I lost, then what I carried all these years. Only then will you understand why that envelope mattered. Child, you've had the beginning, but you must understand the middle, for that is where life pressed hardest on me, where I carried burdens no one else could see. After your grandfather James never returned from the war, I was left standing in a world that had turned cold. I was 21, with your father on my hip and nothing but a broken heart and a small sack of belongings. The telegram had said, "We regret to inform you," and those words became the rhythm of my nights. Regret. Inform. Gone. But I couldn't let grief swallow me whole. I had a child who needed milk, shoes, and a roof. I walked to the diner at dawn, walked until midnight, and came home with my hands smelling of bleach and coffee. Some nights, I would cry quietly in the pantry, so your father wouldn't hear me. I told myself, tomorrow, Ruth, tomorrow you will be stronger. Every dollar I saved, I hid under loose floorboards in an old tobacco tin. Not for dresses or jewels. For safety. For a home no one could take away. And little by little, the tin grew heavier, though my body grew thinner. I remember one winter, the snow piled high against the door. I had only one good coat, so I wrapped it around your father, and I walked in the cold with just a shawl. My fingers cracked until they bled, but I kept stitching clothes for neighbors. When they handed me coins, I pressed them to my lips like they were treasures from heaven. By the time I was 30, I had enough to buy a small patch of land on the edge of town. Not much to look at, just weeds and broken soil. But to me, it was freedom. I borrowed a hammer, carried lumber piece by piece, and with neighbors' help, I raised these very walls. The first night, I slept on the floor with a candle burning and your father curled beside me. I whispered to him, "We are safe now. This house will be our shield." Underscore 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 underscore. But life is never simple, child. Safety does not protect you from loss. When your father was 12, he fell sick. Fevers that wouldn't break. I stayed at his bedside for days, wiping his forehead with rags, begging God to spare him. The doctor said it was pneumonia, and he wasn't sure if a boy that we could make it through. I didn't eat for 3 days. I prayed, "Take me instead." And somehow, he lived. Thin as a twig, but he lived. From that moment, I swore I would protect him with every breath in my body. I worked harder than before. I took cleaning jobs in houses where women looked down on me, their polished shoes clicking on tile while I scrubbed floors until my knees burned. They called me the help. They never knew I was also the foundation, the roof, the beating heart that kept my boy alive. Then came the years of sacrifice people never see. I walked miles each day because bus fare was too costly. I mended the same pair of shoes 3 times until the soles were more patched than leather. I skipped meals so your father could eat. And when he grew older, when college seemed like an impossible dream, I opened that tobacco tin and laid the money on the kitchen table. Go, I told him. Learn. Build a life beyond this. He didn't want to leave me, but I pushed him. Love is not holding close, child. Sometimes it's letting go with score. He studied hard, became a man with a good job, and I thought my years of pain had borne fruit. I thought he would always remember the hands that bled so he could rise. But people change. Comfort makes memory fade. And when he married Clara, I saw in her eyes the judgment I had lived my whole life fighting against. She saw only an old woman with worn dresses and rough skin, not the girl who once built a home from dust. The whispers began slowly, "She's forgetful, she's slowing us down." My plate was served last at dinner. Sometimes not at all. I had those clothes when I walked into rooms. I wanted to shout, "This house exists because I bled for it." But instead, I stayed quiet. I watched. I prayed. Because silence, child, is not weakness. Sometimes silence is waiting. And then came that night, the night I told you about before, when I stood by the kitchen door and heard Clara say she didn't want this useless old woman in her house anymore. Her house. I pressed my hand against the wall and thought, if only these walls could speak, they would remind her whose house this truly is. That night I barely slept. I sat in the dark, staring at the photograph of your grandfather. My tears fell onto the frame. James, I whispered, I did not come this far to be erased. And as if the heavens had me, the next morning, Mr. Harris knocked on the door with that envelope in his hand. Child, that envelope was not just paper. It was years of sacrifice made visible. It was the voice of every tear I swallowed and every mile I walked. And soon, they would see. Child, you remember I told you about that morning. The knock on the door that changed everything. I opened it with trembling hands, and there stood Mr. Harris, our old family lawyer. He was holding a thick envelope, his face heavy with something more than business. Clara was in the kitchen, humming to herself, never expecting that truth had finally come to our doorstep. Ruth, he said softly, I thought it was time this was delivered to you. I took the envelope. My heart pounded, because I knew what it contained. Not just deeds and papers. Proof. Proof that this land, this home, was mine. That every drop of sweat, every blistered hand, had not been forgotten in the silence of years. I sat down at the table, the one where Clara often set my plate aside, and I spread the papers before me. When your father came into the room, Clara right behind him, I lifted my chin. For the first time in many years, I let my voice cut through the air like a blade. This house, I said, tapping the deed, is mine. I bought it when the world thought I had nothing. I built it when I was alone and left behind. Every wall, every floorboard, every brick carries my name. Silence fell. Clara's face turned pale, and your father shifted uneasily, as though remembering a truth he had buried beneath comfort. Mother, he whispered, why didn't you ever tell us? Because I wanted you to grow free, I thought. But aloud, I said, because sacrifice is not something you announce, child. It is something you live. And one day, it reveals itself. The days after were different. Clara did not look at me the same way anymore. There was no more talk of sending me away. The whispers stopped. Respect and not love, perhaps, but respect returned to the air. But I had no joy in their silence. Victory was never what I sought. I only wanted dignity. A place where my bones could rest without shame. At night, I sat with the papers spread out, running my fingers over them. I thought of James, of the young man who never came home, and I whispered, we did it, love. Our son will never be homeless. Our grandchild will always have a roof. Child, listen closely now, for this is the heart of my story. Life will strip you, betray you, break you down until you think you are nothing. But if you plant even the smallest seed of hope, and water it with your tears and your labor, one day that seed will stand taller than those who mocked you. I am not proud of the pain. I am proud of the endurance. That is what you inherit from me, not just this old house, not just the deed. But the fire that says, I will not be erased. So when the day comes that I am gone, do not mourn me with bitterness. Sit in this home, listen to the creak of its wood, the whisper of its walls, and remember that every sound carries my story. Because, child, the house remembers. And now, sir, the grandmother leaned back, her frail hands folded, her eyes glistening with both sorrow and peace. The grandchild reached forward, slipping their small hand into hers. Grandma, the child whispered, I'll never forget. And in that moment, all the years of sacrifice were no longer heavy. They were alive or carried forward in the heart of the next generation.